Welcome back, everyone. By a show of thumbs, for those of you who I actually can see, how was that? A lot of thumbs up. Wonderful. Okay, I did actually pop in and out to almost every single group, but most of you seem to be doing absolutely fine on your own, so I just popped out again. I am going to share a link to Arnett Thompson as was requested. This is Wikipedia, but there are a million other sites containing the index in searchable format, and I just find it to be rather a useful tool if I want to search other world literature. All right, so with that, I hope you took notes because I really do want to hear your brilliant insights with regards to the story. And we're going to begin our rereading of the story right now. We're going to do the bulk of it next week. And I want to begin by going back to what we discussed last week with regards to the Madonna Hall paradigm. So I mentioned just before Heruta about the significance of reading the story within the context of world literature. And partly it's true because the rabbis were actually deeply influenced by the literatures of their time. But you'll remember that last week when we looked at the Madonna Hall complex, we didn't just look at, the Madonna Hall paradigm. We did not just look at the paradigm in its manifestations within ancient culture, within Greco-Roman or Persian culture. We actually followed it into medieval and early modern and late modern and 20th century culture as well. And here I want to talk about a particular way of reading Talmud, which really nobody does. I do, not many other people do, and I think it's one of the best ways reading text in general and Talmudic text in particular. I mentioned this last week. It's a particular literary theory called archetypal criticism. Archetypal criticism posits that if you see a particular archetype, and by archetype I mean a character type, but also a literary motif or a plot element, if you see a particular archetype crop up in stories throughout history and across cultures, you can assume with a high degree of probability that the root of that archetype is not social but psychological, that it derives deep within the human psyche. This goes back to an insight originating with Sigmund Freud and later developed by his disciple Carl Gustav Jung, who broke away from him at some point and was the forefather of archetypal criticism, by which telling stories is one of the best ways we human creatures have of working through our primal fears and fantasies, what Jung calls the collective unconscious. And because the primal fears and fantasies are things that we all as human creatures share, the stories that we tell are essentially the same. And you see this, you'll see that sometimes an ancient Chinese myth will bear an uncanny resemblance to a contemporary Hollywood movie. And that is because these stories all present a working through of the same primal forces. And so as an archetypal critic, you will first try and read the story in comparison to similar archetypes that come up in stories from other literary traditions. And then you will try and identify the psychological force that is being expressed in this particular archetype. And it is this point that I want to begin our rereading of the story of Heruta. I want to begin with Sigmund Freud. Because Freud looks around, and just like we did last week, he sees that every single culture has this Madonna Hall pairing everywhere. And so he assumes correctly, I believe, that the root for this pairing is psychological, and he translates the Madonna Hall paradigm into the Madonna Hall complex. The Madonna Hall complex, according to Sigmund Freud, is a complex that plagues men. Today, it is argued that it equally plagues women, but Freud speaks about men, so we're going to stick with Freud for now. Men who, as they grow up and mature, they fail to establish a healthy, affirming attitude towards sexuality. As a result of which, they will develop the following complex. And can I have a reader of Sigmund Freud? I'm going to share my screen. Can I ask for a reader before I do though? If you'd like to. Anita, thank you. Maggie, can we please give Anita the magical powers of unmuting herself. Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen and apologize for some of the rather explicit language, which, Anita, you did not know you were committing yourself to when you volunteered to read. But please do take it away with number 28.
The whole sphere of love remains divided in the two directions personified in art as sacred and profane, or animal love. Where they love, they do not desire, and where they desire, they cannot love. If someone makes an impression that might lead to a high psychical estimation of her, this impression does not find an issue in any sensual excitation, but in affection which has no erotic effect. This psychical impotence manifests itself in a refusal by the executive organs of sexuality to carry out the sexual act, although before and after they may show themselves to be intact and capable of performing the act.
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to stop you there, Anita. I will also say I've gone back to the main slides of this course. I will be using them next week, and we will be sharing them again next week for those who need them. And so for Sigmund Freud, the Madonna whore complex is a psychological split between women who are objects of love and women who are objects of desire. Where they love, they do not desire, and where they desire, they cannot love. If a man suffering from this complex comes to love and respect a certain woman, she will inevitably remind him of his mother. With Freud, it all goes back to the mother. He will then not be able to regard her erotically. He will not be able to desire her, and ultimately he will not be able to perform with her sexually. It is a form of psychological impotence. What do men do who suffer from this particular complex? According to Freud, such men will find a sexual outlet in what he calls a debased sexual object. Continue, please, Anita.
Man is assured of complete sexual pleasure only when he can devote himself unreservedly to obtaining satisfaction, which, with his well-brought-up wife, for instance, he does not dare to do. This is the source of his need for a debased sexual object, a woman who is ethically inferior, to whom he need attribute no aesthetic scruples, who does not know him in his other social relations and cannot judge him in them. It is to such a woman that he prefers to devote his sexual potency, even when the whole of his affection belongs to a woman of a higher kind.
Thank you. And this, for Freud, is the true origin of the feminine dichotomy, the division of women into loved and undesired Madonnas and desired but unloved whores. And I will say that although this Madonna whore complex and its resulting psychological impotence afflicts only a number of men, Freud posits that the division of women is fairly universal. And so, drawing on this psychological insight, I would like to propose that it is not, as most critics claim, an aversion to sexual relations in general that plagues Avchia. It is an aversion rather to sexual relations with his wife, the Madonna. And with this cliffhanger of a thesis, I will leave you until next week, because I did promise a few minutes of questions. I will say right off the bat that if there are any questions with regards to the story, let's keep them to next week, because we are going to dive in very, very deeply to the story next week. But Maggie, are there any, if there are any immediate questions, please do put them in the chat right now, or you can raise your hand and Maggie can let yourself unmute. So that's very interesting, Karen. Question regarding the hypotheses. How do these hypotheses get tested and confirmed or rejected? I'm not sure I fully understand the question, Michelle, and if not, you can correct me. But the whole point is we take particular readings of the story and we test them out against the story and we see if they actually fit the story consistently throughout. If you remember, Rashi's hypothesis that the story was about an elderly couple didn't quite work because we saw that Rav Chia was struggling mightily against his sexual urge, because he was climbing a tree. There are all these clues that this is not a geriatric man. So if that is the question, great. If not, then please do raise your hand and we can unmute you, and you can ask it a greater detail. The conversations between Freud and Jung, yes, I have a lot to say about Freud, which I do in some other lectures. All right, does Yetzer Hara always refer to sexual desire? That is a fantastic question, Art. I'll talk about that at some length. I discuss this at greater length in the book. In its original meaning, within rabbinic literature, Yetzer Hara, or the evil inclination, is a general term for any kind of inclination to do anything that is evil. To have illicit sexual relations, to steal, to murder, anything bad comes from the evil inclination. However, in the Babylonian Talmud, for various complex reasons, it comes to be identified specifically with the sexual urge. And I think I mentioned this last week, but if not, or if I did, I'll repeat it now because this is important. Not because the Babylonian rabbis believed that sex or sexual desire was evil. Far, far from it. They readily recognized the creative potential of the sexual desire. In some place in the Talmud, they tell this wonderful story about how the rabbis try and put the evil inclination out of commission by sort of tying him up. And they say the next day there was not one egg to be found in all the land, meaning we need sexual desire. It is evil, as in it's extremely powerful and it can lead us to do pretty evil things, but it is also the source of creativity. And the rabbis really do recognize this double force to the sexual urge, and they're quite ambivalent toward it. They recognize both the positive and the negative. All right, I'm seeing a lot of questions. Maggie, can you help me take control here and maybe just repeat, like as in copy paste the questions that are most urgent? Okay, so a lot of these questions we're going to answer next week, so I'm going to ask you to hold on to them. Maggie, if there's anything more urgent, please do repost it for me because I can't sift through all these comments and speak at the same time in a way that is anyway intelligent. Okay, Maggie says she doesn't think so. So once again, I'm going to put my email in the chat box. If you have anything that is absolutely urgent and you cannot wait until next week to get the response to, you are more than welcome to email me. This is my personal email. Those of you who emailed me last class will attest that I do answer. And otherwise, I will wish you a very good week, and I will see you all for the third and final installment next Sunday, please God. Have a great week, everyone.